In this video, I'm gonna teach you the 3 most common study techniques, the 3 least effective, biggest time-wasting study techniques, and the 3 best, most efficient study techniques. So let's get right into it. Number 1, the most common study technique is rereading. Whether that's rereading the text, rewatching a video, rereading your notes. You feel like you didn't get something, so you read it again. That's the most common study technique, and I'm sure every one of you has used this technique or uses this technique regularly. The second most common study technique is highlighting. So you feel like you found some important text, something you want to remember, so you grab your pen, you grab your highlighter, and you underline it or highlight that. And yeah, I did this for a very long time. My books are filled with underlining everywhere, highlighting everywhere, filled. And the third most common study technique is cramming. So you procrastinate your studying, you keep pushing it off until the last minute, and that anxiety is what motivates you to study and cram it all, and you spend a bunch of time the night before and you get by, you cram it in. Those are the 3 most common study techniques. Now let me express the 3 least effective study techniques. So the 3 least effective study techniques, you might have already guessed, are the same as the 3 most common study techniques, which is very unfortunate for a lot of people. And if you've been unaware of this could be eye-opening. So yeah, 3 most common study techniques are also the 3 least effective study techniques. So that is reading, highlighting, and cramming. All 3 of those lead to almost no learning whatsoever. So if you're spending your time and energy using these techniques, it's time to reevaluate whether you could be using your time better. So how do we actually use our time better? Here are the 3 most effective study techniques. Number 1 is practice testing. So what is practice testing? Well, there's a lot of terms that are synonymous with practice testing, but literally it's what it sounds like. Practice testing. Take a practice test. But it also can mean testing yourself, asking yourself questions. Hey, what was that? What was that question? What was the answer to that question? Or flashcards, writing down definition on one side and the word on the other, and testing yourself that way. Active recall and active retrieval practices are also forms of practice testing. So reading a text, looking away, and trying to pull out everything you can remember, everything you learned from that text. Those are practice testing methods. So there's a whole bunch. It's a very big blanket term, but really it's about creating and generating things. And I went over this in a previous video where I described a foundational principle of learning, which is learning is about creating, not consuming. So here you go. The most effective study technique is practice testing. Second most effective practice testing, distributed practice, also known as spaced repetitions. So this is a study technique which you, instead of studying in one block of time, say 1 hour, 1 day, you space that hour of studying across multiple days. And this allows for way more processing of the information, way more neural connections being formed and strengthened, and overall leads to way more learning. And I'll touch on this in a future video, why this really works, but it has to do with sleep. And it has to do with turning your focus away from what you're trying to learn. So by spacing your repetitions over multiple days, you're signaling to your brain, hey, this information is pretty important. We need to use this often. So it's worth the investment of nutrients and effort and space to strengthen these neural connections and make sure these neural connections are efficient, because this is important information. We see this often in our life. So that's distributed practice, second most effective study technique. And the third most effective study technique is called interleaved practice. And what is interleaved practice? You probably haven't heard of interleaved practice before. This is a study technique in which you intermix what you're learning with other subjects, other concepts, other things. So instead of studying one math problem over and over again and over and over again until you get it, you do one type of math problem. Say you're doing it for just very simple terms. Say you're working on addition, or say actually you're working on division. You're learning arithmetic and you're young, so you're learning arithmetic. Instead of just practicing division problems over and over and over again, back-to-back division problems, you do a division problem, and then you do a multiplication problem, and then you do a subtraction problem, then you do a multiplication problem, then you do addition problem, back to division, and you just keep, you mix up what you're learning. And this works within subjects, like I just expressed in math, mixing up the concepts you're learning, but it also, even better, works mixing between subjects. So you're working on a math problem, you're learning a new concept in math, you're learning, say, derivatives in calculus, okay? So you're learning derivatives or practice derivatives, and then during that same study session, you actually switch from math in general and you go to literature and you start reviewing your literature terms you want to learn. And then maybe later you come back to math, but you want to keep mixing these things up and creating new events in your mind. So new events as in, if you just sit there and you study math, or you study one concept in math, even worse, for an hour, that's really one event in your mind. You just did study math. Whereas if you did in an hour, you did 20 minutes of math, 10 minutes of literature, and 10 minutes of programming, and then you go back to 10 minutes of math, and then you go back to literature, and then programming again, and you mixed up that study session. Now there's a lot more events in your mind. You know, you had a math study session, then you had a literature study session, then you had a programming study session, right? And there's this key concept in learning where it's they're referred to as primacies and recencies, and it's a phenomena where our brain tends to remember and learn more at the beginning of things and at the end of things. So we want to create more beginnings and ends, more events. So yeah, now you've got a brief understanding of what the three most effective study techniques are: practice testing, distributed practice, aka spaced repetitions, and interleaved practice. And you can now start formulating maybe some experiments, some new ways of learning. And if you've been using the three most common study techniques, you will be able to cut your total study time way down, and you'll be able to improve the amount you're actually retaining and learning by so much. So less time, more learning. It's an incredible deal. So yeah, give them a try, and yeah, see how it changes your life as a student and your overall just enjoyment of school when you're actually learning things and not having to do these tasks and busy work all the time with no real results. So give them a try, and yeah, have fun.